Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan. We're at the Motor City Mad Mouth, and I'm joined by Stuart Hack, and we have a special guest tonight, Peter Golenbock. Peter, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure, Scott.
So I have an opportunity to talk about your book, The Bronx Zoo, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of great Yankee stories. So go ahead, Stuart, take it away.
You know, The Bronx Zoo was a great book. I read that. My favorite really was Dynasty, and this is coming from a Met fan. How much time did you spend writing that book?
Are you talking about Dynasty?
Yes.
No, Dynasty, that's funny how Dynasty happened. When I was about 13 years old, I went to the Stamford, Connecticut Public Library, and I got a book out called The New York Yankees by Frank Graham. And I was, even as a kid, I was just a tremendous baseball fan. I loved the history of the game. And this was the first book that had conversations with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and people like that. And I just thought this was a magnificent book. And the book ended in 1946, the book that I had read. So as I went along in life, I was the sports editor of the Dartmouth at Dartmouth College. At Dartmouth, I wrote for the New York Times. I wrote for the Boston Globe. And then I went to law school at NYU, and my friend was the sports editor of the Stanford Advocate. So he traded me, he gave me credentials to go see the Knicks, the Rangers, the Mets, the Yankees. In exchange for every weekend, I would write him an article. And I did that for about a year. It was fantastic. So when I was working as a lawyer at Prentice Hall, I was there about 8 weeks trying to figure out President Nixon's wage and price controls. And I saw the catalog for their trade books. And I thought, well, now is the time to see if I can write the sequel to that New York Yankees book by Frank Graham. And so I went down to the head of the trade division of Prentice Hall and knocked on his door. That's how small the operation was. And he let me in, and I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to write a history of the Yankees from 49 to 64. 16 years, 14 pennants, 9 World Series. And if he had been a Red Sox fan or a Chicago Cub fan or a Brooklyn Dodger fan, I would have had a law career. But instead, he was as big a Yankee fan as I was. And he thought that was a fabulous idea. Just think, you know, some kid out of nowhere walks in, knocks on his door, suggests a book idea, and gets a contract. I mean, it doesn't happen. Literally, it doesn't happen. But I got one. And it was really the only book I ever intended to write. I spent 3 years writing it. I spent from September of, what year was it? 77 to February, March of, no, it was not. I'm wrong about this. I signed this contract in 72. So I was with the Yankees from September of 72 to March of 73, which was the period when Steinbrenner bought the team from CBS. So I was there to witness all of that. But after doing all of my research, it occurred to me that you can't write a book based on research, based on newspaper articles. So I decided what I really wanted to do was go and interview all of the Yankee players. And the people who were there at Mike Burke's Yankees were so wonderful. They gave me the names, addresses, telephone numbers of all those Yankees. And they wrote a letter for me that I sent to each of them saying, Peter Golenbock is writing this book, please cooperate with him. So that gave me license to go and see Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, Roger Maris, you name it, and I got the chance to interview them. And it was spectacular. And so 2 years of interviews, I think I was on the road for 33,000 miles. And then I wrote 1,000 pages, which my editor, Frank Coffey, cut in half. And that was Dynasty. And that was going to be the only book I was ever going to write. And it's, you know, it's still in print today. The book came out in 1975. So what is that, 45 years later? And that book is still in print today. And so after that, I got a job working at the Bergen Record. I started as a reporter. I ended up as the assistant night news editor about a year and a half later. And then I got a call from Billy Martin's agent. Do you want to write a book with Billy Martin? Well, yeah, I do. Because in Dynasty, I had said that Billy Martin was as important a figure as Mickey Mantle or Whitey Ford, as important to the Yankees. And nobody apparently had ever said that about Billy before. And he thought that was fabulous. And so what happened was he couldn't do it at that time, and the agent had one other client. Now we'll get to your original question. And that one other client was Sparky Lyle. So the agent says to me, I'd like you to do this book with Sparky Lyle. Well, Sparky had won the Cy Young Award in 1977. But I thought to myself, you know, why would somebody be interested in what Sparky has to say? And I said that to the agent. And the agent, quite brilliantly, because he was going to get a piece of it, he said to me, well, come on down to Fort Lauderdale and meet Sparky, and you can sit with the rest of the boys being Reggie Jackson, Thurman Munson, Ron Guidry, and so forth, and see what there is to see. And so I did. I got on a plane, flew down to Fort Lauderdale, and I'm sitting in the Yankee clubhouse with all these fabulous people. So I said to Sparky, I said, if we keep a diary, we've got something really special here. And what I didn't realize was that Sparky was really angry. He was making $140,000 a year. And in the middle of the winter, Steinbrenner signed Goose Gossage, gave him $2 million and took Sparky's closing job away from him, even though he had just won the Cy Young Award. So not only did I have a man who was a fabulous reporter in his own right, as Sparky was, and somebody who could tell wonderful, wonderful stories, but he was angry. And so he was not shy about telling me what was really going on. And that, quite frankly, was the success of the Bronx Zoo. We sold 220,000 hardcovers of the Bronx Zoo. I think today, the biggest selling.
I think he's getting hit with the storm.
Okay, we're still here, Peter. Go ahead, continue.
Still there.
So that's my story. Have any other questions?
Yeah. So, what, comparing the Dynasty Yankees, the 1949 to 1964, to the late 70s Yankees, were there any? I know that there's a generation of players that changed, but were there any similarities that you saw from the Yankees from the 50s and 60s to the Yankees in the late 70s, or the biggest difference that you may have seen?
I don't know. These are great players. They had great players with Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle in the 50s. Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris in the 60s. And they had Reggie Jackson, Thurman Munson. They had Greg Nettles. They had, Guidry. They had Catfish Hunter, who was as great as any of them. This is a team that had money, who was able to spend their money and buy great players. And they had a fine front office for the most part. The Steinbrenner saga was very interesting. He owned the team for, say, 30 years. And yet they only had 2 times when the team won. And both of those times were after Steinbrenner was suspended from baseball for 2 years. Because of what that did, the first time, it allowed Gabe Paul to keep the young players. Steinbrenner wanted to trade Guidry away. Gabe Paul knew that was a bad idea. Steinbrenner was a guy who was always trading young kids in exchange for over-the-hill veterans. So if you remember Seinfeld, that incredible that incredible, wonderful episode on Seinfeld where George Costanza's father is visited by Steinbrenner, who thinks that George is dead. He tells George's father that he thinks George is dead, and the first thing George's father says to him is, "Why did you trade Jay Buhner?" The funniest thing ever on television. It was absolutely hilarious.
You know, it's funny. I had the opportunity to interview Marty Appel, and I said, was the Steinbrenner character like the one that was portrayed on Seinfeld?
Oh, absolutely.
He said exactly, and he says, and I was George.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
Willie McGee was a player that they traded away, and he had a pretty fine career with the St. Louis Cardinals, leading them to a World Series championship. So
They traded all sorts of wonderful players away. But see, during the two periods when the Yankees won, Steinbrenner wasn't there. So Gabe Paul kept the young kids that enabled them to win in 76, 77, 78, and 81. And the next time when Steinbrenner got involved paying Howie Spira, if you remember, Howie Spira was giving Steinbrenner information on Dave Winfield, who was one of his players. Winfield had a foundation. Steinbrenner was incredibly angry at Winfield because Winfield had signed a contract that had a, what is it called? The cost of living clause in it. So if the cost of living went up, Winfield got more money. And Steinbrenner, they wrote about this in the New York Times, and it embarrassed Steinbrenner because he didn't realize that it was in the contract. And so Steinbrenner, very much like Trump, went after Winfield. So he got this guy, Henry Spira, to give dirt on Dave Winfield. And of course he got caught and he was suspended for 2 years. And during those 2 years is when Stick Michael, the general manager, was able to keep Derek Jeter, was able to keep Bernie Williams, was able to keep Andy Pettit, was able to keep their wonderful catcher. All those guys, all these young kids, Steinbrenner would have traded them all away. But because he was gone, he was able to stay. They were able to stay on the Yankees and win all those pennants and World Series in the 2000s.
You know, Don Mattingly, to me, it's a shame that he didn't experience any more winning. But because I had the opportunity this year to work with Don Mattingly with the Miami Marlins.
What a lovely guy!
Yeah.
Lovely guy,
Isn't he? Yeah, he
lovely
really.
guy. Never. They won the year before he came, and they won the year after he left.
It's too bad because I'll tell you what, Don Mattingly, the job he did with the Miami Marlins this year, winning the Manager of the Year, and the way he was able to manage under
Absolutely.
the most difficult circumstances with COVID-19. I'm glad he won the Manager of the Year, and I've learned a lot about baseball working with Don this year, and looking forward to working with him a lot more
Well,
often.
let me ask you while I've got you on the line. Tell me about Mattingly and how he manages.
Well, he manages with his guts, and he's a player's manager where he listens to his players and tries to put them in a position where they can succeed. He's a very positive individual.
He is another one of these. We've got a guy like that too. Cash. Cash is just a terrific manager for the Tampa Bay Rays here in St. Petersburg.
He won the American League Manager of the Year.
American League Manager of the Year. Another very positive guy. Yeah, it's nice to know that Mattingly is that way too. I think this is the new trend in managers, where you sort of treat the players as part of your family rather than beat them up the same way Dick Williams or Billy Martin or some of these other guys used to beat up their players.
Yeah, what I saw this year, Peter, with Mattingly goes beyond anyone's comprehension of. Not only he's a genuine person,
Yes.
the way he relates to his players. I mean, he's the most lovable guy. The way he treats us here in the media. Some guys will ask the same question 1 or 2 times over differently, and he's very polite and doesn't dodge anything because maybe he sees a question from another person differently than the one that originally asked it. Just one of the finest people I've ever worked with over the years. And you know what, Peter? I've been in the media myself for the better part of 40 years. So,
Yeah.
Metro Detroit area. And, again, we talked about Stump Merrill being a nice guy.
Very nice.
The managers that I work with, but
Yep.
Don Mattingly, to me, is as good as it gets.
Well, let me ask you, did Derek Jeter ever show up to a point where you could talk to him?
I haven't had a chance to meet him. This is my first year covering the Marlins, Peter.
I see.
So I look forward to the opportunity when I do go to games to talk to Derek. He's from my home state. He's from Michigan. It was a sad shame that he never played in the All-Star game at Comerica Park. Because
I
the
know.
guy that should have been there, it was him. But I haven't had the chance to meet Derek Jeter, but I understand what he's doing. I look forward to the opportunity if I don't see him in spring training at some point at Marlins Park. It was an unbelievable story that we heard in South Florida, a team that lost 105 games, and they were, and the amount of postseason experience and everything I saw. The only thing I didn't do right this year, and if I had known about this 30 years ago, it'd be different, is I'm not bilingual, so how many of those Spanish questions that I wasn't able to.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
But it's an experience when you cover the Marlins, and a lot of these guys are talking in Spanish. You don't know what they're talking about. But.
No, but it's true on every team.
Yeah.
Every team's got Spanish players.
Yeah, but I love it when the PR guys are saying, all right, let's talk about it in Spanish. I'm thinking, great. Is he asking something I don't know? Or
Well,
was I smart enough to even figure it out?
Yourself an interpreter. You need to bring an interpreter with you.
I'm too old to say I probably do, but I'm too old to take Spanish. But
No, bring somebody. Bring a friend of yours who knows Spanish with you.
during COVID-19,
Yeah, sure.
oh, why not? Okay. I hear you. But no, it was a treat, and I'm looking forward to working with Donnie even more. I've always respected him as a player. I really have. And yeah, but now obviously when you see the way he manages the game, his players are he's just a calming influence is what he has.
Yes.
And if anybody could have managed around 174 roster moves, Pete, you tell me, because that wasn't easy. And he knew it, and he embraced it, and didn't even care.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the new baseball.
Yeah.
Sabermetrics.
You bring that up, okay? So my question to you is, how do you embrace analytics in today's game?
How does who embrace analytics?
I mean, do you put a lot of stock in it, or do you believe it that you manage?
I put a lot of stock in it.
Yeah.
They put a lot of stock in it. The people who own these teams the successful teams put a lot of stock in it. That's why Moneyball was such a tremendously successful book and movie, because it was the genesis, the beginning of this sabermetrics, and the scene where the general manager has to choose between the guy with the computer and the 17 scouts. He keeps the guy with the computer and fires all the guys with the scouts, fires all the scouts. And that's the modern day. And I'll tell you something, it has to work. I'm telling you, the smart people with those numbers, somehow they know how to move the players around on defense. They know which pitchers to pitch. Though I have to say, when Kevin Cash in the 6th game of the World Series, he had our boy Snell pitching, and Snell was pitching the finest game of his life. And in the either 5th or 6th inning, he took him out. When he did that, I think every Rays fan screamed bloody murder. How in the world can you take this guy out? And of course, the next fellow who came in, who was Nick Anderson, who's a wonderful relief pitcher, but he had been having trouble the last several outings. He gave up the 2 runs to lose the game. So despite this incredible, fantastic year that Kevin Cash had with the Tampa Bay Rays, the thing that he will be remembered for most is taking Blake Snell out of the game when he should not have.
All right. It's a slippery slope, because as a Met fan in recent World Series history, so if you remember in 2015, Matt Harvey talked his way into staying into the game.
Yep.
And it worked out. And you go back to 2000 when Al Leiter also talked his way into staying in the game. So that could have been in the back of Kevin Cash's mind, that he doesn't want to leave him in too long. And maybe this way was working all year.
Well, what was in the back of Kevin Cash's mind was in the mind of all these number crunches, which is when the pitcher faces the lineup the 3rd time around, the team has a higher batting average than the 2nd time around, which has a higher batting average than the 1st time around. So his thought was that, you know, the Dodgers had marvelous hitters, and he was afraid that this 3rd time through the lineup that they were going to be successful. I'm telling you, Snell was so fabulous. He had struck out the 1, 2, and 3 batters twice each, and these were the guys coming up. How he could have taken them out, it's just, it's inexcusable. It's interesting. Bobby Valentine and I have been doing a book. Bobby Valentine was the manager of the 2000 Mets, as you know, and you know, he talks about, you know, in the book that we're writing, he talks about that series. That was the Mets against the Yankees in the World Series, which I'm sure you remember.
Yeah, I do.
Well, Pete, I do have a question for you. Obviously, you live in the St. Petersburg area. The Rays obviously play over at Tropicana
I'm
Field.
surprised you can't hear the rain.
Yeah, well, maybe at times I can, maybe at times I can't.
Oh, I mean, right now. Talking about right now.
Yeah, I don't hear it right now, but
Okay, good. Well, we've got good windows in the house.
oh, that's good. Well, that's another lifetime ago when I used to sell replacement windows back in Michigan. But
All right.
bringing back some memories there. But so let's talk about the stadium, Tropicana Field. I know
All right.
this is up, I believe, in 2027.
Yeah.
Is there any movement towards getting him a stadium there, or do you think that the Rays could be moving somewhere else?
One of those people who think the Rays just fine to stay where they are. Very, very high television ratings. They've got a very lovely fandom. They draw about 18,000 people a game, but owners want more. You know, it's not enough. They want to draw, you know, the way the Yankees draw. They want to draw the way the Red Sox draw. They're, you know, they're in Tampa, St. Petersburg. There are a lot of elderly. Going to these games is fairly expensive. They have 70-inch televisions. They'd rather sit at home and watch it on TV. So the Rays came up with this sort of idea that they would play half the games in Montreal and half the games in St. Petersburg, because they tried to get a new stadium in Tampa. They wanted to raise $800 million. And after 6 months, they raised $19 million, which wasn't enough to buy the foul pole. And so they're pretty much, at the moment at any rate, stuck with being in St. Petersburg. You know, the owner's not happy with that. I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I can't be critical, because I was so shocked when they brought a team to my little town of St. Petersburg in 1998. And so we've had 22 years of baseball, and all of it's been a plus. It's been quite wonderful. So I have no complaints whatsoever.
Well, when you talk about your history with the Yankees, I'll bet if I throw a couple names at you, they'll probably jog your memory. Jim Ogle.
Jim Ogle was wonderful. He was what, the Newark Star Ledger,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. He was old and crusty. Lovely guy, though. I was never a newspaper reporter. I was never a sports reporter. I only got to know these guys if I went to, say, Old Timers Day.
Right.
Or if while I was writing Dynasty, they would come to the PR office. You mentioned Marty Appel. When I was thinking about writing Dynasty, Marty was the assistant PR guy with the Yankees. And I drove over there to the stadium and I met with Marty and I said, look, if I can get a contract to write a book about the Yankees, will you let me do my research here in Yankee Stadium? And he says, of course, I'll let you do your research here in Yankee Stadium. I don't think you'll ever get a contract, but if you do, you know, you can do your research here. And sure enough, I got the contract. And Marty and I became great friends, and we've been friends ever since.
Well, Jim Ogle was chairman of the board with the Fort Lauderdale Yankees, so I used to talk baseball with him. And I got to know him well. Another guy that you're probably familiar with is Ken Nigro. He was a PR guy with him for a while. And another
He was there not a long time. He was not there a long time, Nigro.
No, well, George Steinbrenner went through PR guys really quickly.
I knew about 10. I knew about 10 Yankee PR guys, yes.
Yeah, he went through them pretty quick. And, no, and one of my favorite writers in New York, who was like a mentor of sorts to me, was Phil Pepe.
Lovely man. Yes,
Oh,
I
he
knew. I
was.
knew
Okay.
Phil.
I met him at the 1981 baseball winter meetings, and the times that I spent with Phil Pepe, asking him questions. I see him at Fort Lauderdale. Just one of the finest people you'll ever meet in this
Yeah,
business.
he was one of the original chipmunks.
Was he?
These young guys came in, and they were called the chipmunks.
Really?
Phil Pepe and the boys. Yeah.
In fact, when I was my first interview with Tom Lasorda back in '81, I'm intimidated by it. I mean, get this, I'm 18, 19 years old, so I didn't know what to ask Tommy at the time. Phil took me down and just calmed me down a little bit. Here's a few questions. Don't worry, Tommy, we'll talk the rest. And from that point, you would go ahead and pick his brain about everything, and he gave me his number. One of the Stuart, if you could ever meet a guy like Phil Pepe, everybody's better because of Phil Pepe for sure.
Without a doubt.
And Ken Nigro was nice enough to credential me, in Fort Lauderdale. And of course, Jim Ogle, he was a pretty good guy. I really enjoyed, but he spent time in Fort Lauderdale. I spent a lot of time talking baseball with him. Certainly one of the finer people you can ever meet.
Absolutely.
He was in charge of the old timer stuff. You're right.
Yeah.
Of all the interviews that you did for Dynasty and even the Bronx Zoo, were there any players that were difficult to either get a hold of, or once you got them really didn't cooperate as much as you would have liked?
Over the years, I've only had a couple of players who were not cooperative. One was Joe DiMaggio. I went to San Francisco to interview Joe. And Joe's problem is that he was always afraid that people would ask him about Marilyn Monroe. So he was very reluctant to give interviews. And so I went to his restaurant and I talked to his older brother, Tom. Joe, not here. And sure enough, I'm sure when Joe saw me coming, he ran in the other direction. But it sort of fit in with who DiMaggio was. I'm trying to think. One of the Dodger pitchers. Oh my, Joe Black. That's who. His name is Joe Black, and I don't know what the story was, but I called him on the phone. He lived in Norfolk. No, he didn't. He lived in Phoenix, but he was in Norfolk for some reason, and he asked me to meet him there in Norfolk. And I came and I shook his hand and I said, "May I interview you?" And he said, "No, you may not," and he left, and he walked out. I have no idea what that was all about, but he's really the only, in all the years, Joe Black was really the only player who stiffed me.
Did you ever feel intimidated, because you were young when you wrote Dynasty, to sit in a room with Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, all these Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers?
I was never intimidated, though I have to tell you, when I went to see Mickey, which was kind of an interesting story, I was supposed to meet him at his home in Dallas. So I flew from New York to Dallas, and I got to Dallas, I got on the phone and I called, and his wife answered and said, "I'm sorry, Mickey's in New York. He's got something at Yankee Stadium tomorrow." So sure enough, I got on the plane, flew back to New York, where I went into the clubhouse the next day to talk to Mickey. And I wasn't intimidated, but I was totally awestruck because he was certainly my hero. And I had interviewed Ellie Howard. So I went over to Ellie and I said, "Ellie, would you do me a favor? Would you introduce me to Mickey?" And Ellie, who was as sweet as could be, said, "Of course I will." And he brought me over to Mickey, and I said to him, "Mickey, Mr. Mantle, would you mind if I ask you a few questions?" And he looks me in the eye and he goes, "No." And then he broke into this big grin and started laughing. And we must have talked for an hour in that clubhouse. And as you saw in the book, he was absolutely sensational. I mean, Mickey had retired after the '68 season, and this was in 1973. So this was 5 years after he had retired. And he just missed it terribly. And he started telling me about his nightmares, how in the middle of the night he was dreaming that he was standing outside of Yankee Stadium and he could hear the public announcer saying, "And now batting in the third position, number 7, Mickey Mantle, and Mickey couldn't find the door to get into the stadium. And he would wake up in a cold sweat. I mean, it was really something that he would tell me a story like that. And I had, you know, wonderful times with all sorts of players for that dynasty book. It was quite a tremendous experience. I had to chase Roger Maris. He was another guy who didn't particularly like to be interviewed. He had been treated terribly with the Yankees. After he hit 61 home runs, the writers treated him badly. The fans booed him because they preferred Mickey to him. And in 1966, in May, Roger had slid into home plate and caught his hand on the spikes of the home plate umpire and broken his hand. And Ralph Houck, who was the general manager, sent Roger for x-rays. And the x-rays came back that he had a broken hand, but Ralph Houck didn't want to tell Roger that because he needed Roger to draw fans. The Yankees were not very good. So Roger only found out later that was the case, and he was very bitter about that. And so he was going to retire at the end of the 66 season. And Ralph Houck said to him, "Would you please hold off your retirement until the spring, and we'll have a day for you." So Roger said, okay. And about 2 weeks later, Ralph Houck traded him to the St. Louis Cardinals. And interestingly enough, he didn't retire. He played 2 more years with the St. Louis Cardinals, led the Cardinals to pennants in 1967 and 1968. That's how great a player Roger Maris was. But I got to interview Roger. I finally got to interview him.
So do you feel that when he went to St. Louis, that he was probably more appreciated in St. Louis? Everybody knows that baseball is, well, in St. Louis, they treat their people, one of the best baseball towns in Major League Baseball, St. Louis.
You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. They treated Roger the way he always should have been treated in St. Louis. He's revered and he's revered in New York now. I mean, for crying out loud, he led them to pennants in 60, 61, 62, 63, and 64. That's 5 pennants. And then he went to St. Louis and won 2 more pennants. He should be in the Hall of Fame. There are 2 players that infuriate me, absolutely infuriate me that they're not in the Hall of Fame. One is Roger Maris, and the other is Gil Hodges. Gil Hodges was a wonderful first baseman for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Why he's not in the Hall of Fame just annoys the heck out of me.
Well, me being a Detroiter, I'm really curious as to your thoughts about Mickey Lolich. Do you think he should be in the Hall of Fame?
How many wins does Mickey have?
217. So,
217 may not be enough. If he had 317, I'd say absolutely.
But it was
217 might be enough. Though he was a wonderful pitcher.
Yeah.
No question about it. And there are pitchers in the Hall of Fame with 217 wins.
Yeah.
But most of them are guys from the 20s.
He ate a lot of innings, and who can forget his heroics in the 68 World Series. Plus, he had a lot of complete games, and I had a good opportunity to spend time with Mickey Lolich in Southwest Florida, out in Naples area, and had him on a unbelievable. And, you know, on my Facebook page, anybody that looks up my Facebook page, I have my hero, Mickey Lolich, right next to me.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
I'm bitter about Mickey Lolich being a Met fan because the Mets traded away their best hitter after 1975 on a team that needed offense for Mickey Lolich, coming to a team that really didn't need the pitching. And he didn't pitch badly for them in 76, but he clearly didn't want to be there.
Right.
And he ended up, I guess, retiring, but he came back as a reliever for the Padres a few years later. But, you know, my memory of him, you know, he wasn't well received by the fans because Staub was a popular player, had gotten him to the World Series in 73. And, you know, they just kind of, you know, there were certain trades that the Mets made that you could kind of say, all right, this is why they did it. Like even the Nolan Ryan trade, you could say, well, he never would have been successful in New York. Jim Fregosi was coming off one season removed from a nice year. You know, maybe he fills in the hole of third base. This trade just never made sense from the get-go. Staub for Lolich to me.
Neither did the Nolan Ryan trade, which was maybe the worst trade, one of the worst trades in the history.
It ended up, being that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Valentine was with Nolan Ryan in a couple of places, and got to see, because with the Mets never gave Nolan Ryan a real opportunity to start. Nolan was sort of the fifth guy, so that if they wanted to give some other starter a rest, Nolan filled in. So he never was, an every fifth day pitcher with the Mets. As soon as to the Angels, he became that guy. And suddenly he became, he walked guys, but he started winning an awful lot of games, and he became a real force. So the Mets,
I think with the Mets, they didn't really have the patience for his control. And that's why.
That's right.
But the Angels were a team that was trying to rebuild, trying to get somewhere. They threw him in there, probably they didn't have anyone better, so they could live with the fact that, he might walk 7, 8, 9 guys, but his arm was rubber, he could pitch as long as you want, and he was striking out guys left and right, and eventually he got it.
He threw 8 no-hitters.
Well, remember, when he was with the Angels, though, they're a relatively new franchise, so at that particular point, why not have him out there? You talk about St. Louis being a great baseball town. Mark McGwire was traded there, and he opted to stay there. So you talk about embracing it. And I know you probably came in contact with a guy that I'm really close to, was like an adopted uncle. Ernie Harwell used to tell me all kinds of stories that were unbelievable. And I would spend time with him. I called him my Uncle Ernie, and he treated me like his own nephew, because every time I needed to talk to him, he was always there. It was unbelievable, some of the relationships Pete that you built over the years.
No, the people who worked in St. Louis were spectacular, almost to a man. They were absolutely spectacular. One of the books I wrote was about the St. Louis Cardinals and the St. Louis Browns. So I got to interview a lot of Cardinals and a lot of Browns. I spent some time in St. Louis. Quite a lovely place.
Well, we have a friend of the show. I'm sure you're probably quite familiar with him, Mark Littell. Are you familiar with Mark?
Sure.
Mark has become a very good friend of mine, and Stuart and I have him on our broadcast quite a bit. So,
very nice.
Yeah, he certainly is a remarkable person. I've learned a lot, a good friend, but
Yeah, he could pitch.
Yeah, he can. I'll tell you what, I don't know if he's more popular for his baseball or his life afterwards with his nutty buddy. but just thought I'd give Marco a little bit of a plug there for the nutty buddy.
Good idea. Sure.
So now, I'm interested in the book you're writing with Bobby Valentine now. Is that Bobby's career, or is that
It's Bobby's life?
Okay.
Bobby's life. It's going to be called Valentine's Way.
Okay.
And it's so interesting. One of the most fun things that I've ever done. He's just wonderful, wonderful guy who's seen and done so much, and he's got story after story after story. And it's funny, we're talking about Lasorda. Lasorda was managing in Ogden, Utah, when Bobby was drafted by the Dodgers. He was the number 5 pick in 1968. The number 4 pick was Thurman Munson with the New York Yankees. So Bobby goes to the Dodgers, and they sent him to Ogden, Utah, who is managed by Tommy Lasorda. Now, Walt Alston is the manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I must say, Walt Alston was one of these old timers. Tommy Lasorda was different. Tommy loved the people who played for him and just treated them fabulously. Tommy did a very strange thing. He had his star players. Bill Buckner was one of them. Tom Paciorek was another one. Bobby Valentine was another one. He had his star players write to the players on the Dodgers and say to them, "Look out, I'm coming for your job."
Oh, really?
And this was something that Walt Alston just couldn't stomach. And it was why all of those 3 guys, the 3 guys, Valentine, Paciorek, and Bill Buckner, never became Dodgers. They all ended up playing somewhere else. The one guy who refused to do it was the Dodger first baseman for all those years.
Steve Garvey.
Steve Garvey refused to write the letter. And
Wow.
he ended up as the Dodger first baseman instead of Buckner. Should have been Buckner. Garvey ended up the Dodger first baseman all those years.
Does Valentine ever lament like what would have happened with his career if he hadn't, banged up his knee against the fence when he's playing with the Angels?
I'm sure in the middle of the night he does. It wasn't banged up his knee. He broke the thing in half. It
Yeah.
totally destroyed his career. He was going to be Ichiro. I mean, when he was in Spokane, he had 210 hits, 220 hits, something like that in the season.
I was hitting over 300 when he.
Oh, he was going to be Ichiro. He was going to be spectacular. 30, 40. He was it's when I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, and Bobby grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. And it just so happened one day I see the Rippewam High School varsity high school baseball team play a game. And this 9th grader was playing shortstop for Rippewam High School, which just doesn't happen. And it was Bobby Valentine. That's how spectacular a player he was going to be until he ran into that fence and broke his leg as horribly as he did.
When you talk about the Bronx Zoo, a guy that stands out to me is Greg Nettles. I know he wrote the book Balls. Is that correct?
He did.
So tell me a little bit about your dealings with Greg Nettles and then the book that he ended up writing, Balls. I'm sure that was probably a very interesting read.
Oh, Greg was a wonderful character. He was another guy who didn't particularly like George Steinbrenner. And he certainly didn't like Reggie Jackson. He and Thurman were very close. And so when Reggie came to the Yankees and he was interviewed by Bob Ward, and he said in Sport Magazine, "I'm the straw that stirs the drink." Thurman thinks he's the straw, but he can only stir it bad. Well, when that magazine article came out, he lost, any kinship to the rest of his teammates. Reggie was on his own. And Greg really never forgave him for that. He never did. But Greg was a sardonic guy. He also was a terrific reporter, telling me, what was going on at the time. He talked about Sparky Lyle losing his job. He said he went from Cy Young to sayonara, which is a very clever thing to say. Greg was a very interesting guy and a very good storyteller.
You talk about Thurman Munson. We know about the way he was tragically killed. I guess you can look at him as what could have been, should have been Hall of Famer.
Well, he was at the end of his career. Don't forget, he wasn't going to be playing much longer anyway. When he still end up in the Hall of Fame, his numbers are a little short, but he was a catcher. He was a tremendous personality. His teammates absolutely loved him. I mean, they saw Thurman as sort of the heart of the Yankee team. And on that day when he died, 1979, that took the heart out of everybody. They were just stunned by that. They couldn't believe it. They probably still can't believe it all these years later.
Sure. Well, I think
you had said Nettles had never really forgiven Reggie. Did Thurman ever forgive Reggie?
No.
Before?
No. Thurman thought that Reggie was an asshole. No. Reggie was on his own. But I have to tell you, despite all that, Reggie Jackson was a stupendous baseball player. He wasn't called Mr. October for nothing. The last game where I took my parents to a World Series game was the game when Reggie hit 3 home runs off of 3 pitches. 3 different pitchers, 3 pitches for home runs in that one game in '77. An amazing performance, an absolutely amazing performance. And I'll never forget, too, the next year, one of the opening games of the season at Yankee Stadium, they handed out Reggie bars. The Reggie bars were round, and they had an orange covering. And so they handed them out 50,000 Reggie bars to a full house. And Reggie hit a home run early in the game, and it was funny because you could see it. 4 or 5 people started throwing their Reggie bars onto the field, and all of a sudden it was a swarm of Reggie bars go sailing out onto the field from the stands. It was an amazing moment in Yankee history.
Well,
And was it prompted by the fact that when Reggie signed, he said they're going to name a candy bar after me when he signed
That was part of it. Yep, absolutely. Well, they did. It was a Reggie bar. And so Greg said, it's a candy bar that's meant to throw.
it?
when you talk about Billy Martin, a guy that comes to mind for me is Lou Piniella. I actually had a chance to talk to Lou Piniella many years ago in Fort Lauderdale.
Uh-huh.
And again, you learn a lot, but to me, Lou Piniella is it reminds me a lot of Billy Martin in the way that they were fired up, the way they would get thrown out of games, of flamboyancy, for how they managed. Plus, they were good baseball people as well. So, give me a story about Lou Piniella in terms of not only your dealings with him, but the type of career he had, not only on the field as a really good player, but a really good manager as well. Because Lou Piniella, not only did he do what he did with the Yankees, he was able to win a championship with the Reds, and he was able to win in Seattle, which is not easy to do.
Yeah, it's funny. I was tremendously disappointed. I had met with Lou Piniella, and I really thought that the two of us were going to write a book about his managerial career, because he's had very, very interesting people to play for, people playing for him on, the Yankees and the Reds and a couple other teams as well. Seattle. He was on that Seattle team where they won 116 games. It was amazing. Unfortunately, he decided to do it with one of the newspaper reporters, one of the guys he was closer to, which was a really big disappointment to me. But Piniella is a very interesting guy. And he managed the Tampa Bay Rays for a few years. And basically, at the end of his reign, he told them, if you don't get me better players, I'm quitting. And they didn't get him better players, and he quit and went somewhere else.
It was too bad. I know he's from that area.
Yes, he was from Tampa. He absolutely was from Tampa, yes.
Yeah, in fact, I tell you what, you talk about being from the Tampa area. I have a lot of baseball ties to there. Pop Quest is a guy. I used to cover high school baseball, and the people you come across in the Tampa area, such as Pop Quest. Stuart was on a broadcast with me with KR Lombardia. So if you go to the Tampa side and realize how many great players have come out of there, it's just remarkable.
It is. It's amazing. It's true.
Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is quite the baseball area. It's really wonderful. I coached Little League for about 12 years and coached on one of these, travel teams where we traveled the state. We saw, other great teams, and Florida's just filled with baseball. It's really, really quite a wonderful thing.
Tell me about Hal Steinbrenner. Have you had many dealings with Hal Steinbrenner? Obviously, we know how George bought players, but Hal Steinbrenner doesn't mind spending money where he has to. More low-key than his dad.
He freeze up.
Yeah, now I hear the rain, but that's okay.
I know it's raining here, but I don't think I'm getting the winds that Peter is.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean,
Uh-oh.
we're coming back.
Okay. Anyways, let's talk about Hal Steinbrenner.
Yeah, so the jury's still out on Hal Steinbrenner. I don't know how good an owner he is. I really don't know. He's had the same general manager who George had, the guy that George used to torture, and he's still there. They're still an interesting team. I don't know how much winning they're going to do. I don't know. I don't have a handle on how good Hal is as an owner. I don't know.
Well, I had an opportunity a couple of years ago out in Arizona writing a story on DJ LeMahieu.
Oh, wow.
Let me tell you, DJ LeMahieu, one of the quiet guys, leads by example, and I know he's declining the Yankees uh, option. But what are your thoughts about DJ LeMahieu?
He was the best player on the team.
Yeah,
He was just the best player on the team. He's declining the Yankee option, really?
yeah, he is. He's got a test free agency. But what he did in
Wow.
Colorado, one of the more down to earth people I've ever come across. I had when he was with the Rockies, and I was out in Scottsdale. I got to know him because he's from the Metro Detroit area, so I was
I
able
see.
to write a story on him. And
Well, the guy's a spectacular, spectacular baseball player. He's just tremendous. The guy leading the league in hitting wherever he goes. You know, it'll be interesting to see if he ends up with the Mets, because the Mets now have a new owner, and the Mets owner has $14 billion and has vowed that he's going to rebuild the Mets into a championship team no matter what it takes. And they've got, you know, very, very good. They fired all of their executives.
well, they brought Sandy Alderson back, but
Yeah, they brought in Sandy Alderson, who was there at Moneyball. He was there over in Oakland, and I've known Sandy. Sandy and I went to college together. Sandy's a very bright guy, and it would not surprise me to see the Mets come back again this year.
Yeah, DJ LeMahieu could play in any era. I mean, he really is.
Absolutely.
You talk about some players who can play in certain eras. DJ LeMahieu, I don't care whether you're in the 60s or 2020, doesn't make any difference. This guy.
Well, it was interesting because the Yankees had this fabulous second baseman. Begins with a C. What's his name?
Oh, Robinson Cano.
Cano. He had this fabulous second baseman, Cano, and they got rid of Cano. And they somehow they brought LeMahieu in to play second base, and not one Yankee fan in the world knew who the hell the guy was. He had been playing in the National League. Nobody knew this guy. And he turned out to be absolutely spectacular. He became one of the fan favorites in about 5 minutes. He was something.
Well, it's not like Colorado, Peter, is considered a hotbed for baseball either out in
Colorado's like San Diego, and it's like Tampa Bay. It's like they play their games in total, you know, invisibility.
Right.
Nobody knows what the hell they're doing out there. Nobody.
Yeah, then you bring him over to New York and
Yeah.
the hit,
Right.
and he quietly gets a job done, especially on a team where you have Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, and yet LeMahieu is a guy who's, of all of them, to me, is performing better than any of those guys.
No question. Absolutely right.
You know, I don't know if the Mets necessarily go after him just because, although he would be a total upgrade over Cano, they have to somehow find someone to take Cano's contract. You know, I see the Mets going after a Real Muto, a Trevor Bauer. You know, if they got those two guys.
How about all of the above?
Well,
I'm telling you, Cohen, the new owner, has $14 billion. He can handle Cano's contract.
What I like about him is he's a Met fan, as
He
opposed
is.
to the Wilpons, who were really Brooklyn Dodger fans. So to me, as a lifelong Met fan, you know, this is what I like to see, someone who went to the games as a kid and kind of grew up with the team. You know, he's going to spend money. And it was interesting. I heard the press conferences. Sandy Alderson actually seems more relaxed now than when he was with the team the first time. You know, it just seems like he has a little bit more of a rope and he can do more things, where he stepped into a situation the last time where he was limited when he was with the Mets the last time. He couldn't really do the things
That's right.
that he thought made the most baseball sense.
Well, they had a problem, and the problem was the Wilpons. The problem was the Wilpons and the son Jeffrey. He gave Jeffrey. I mean, Bobby Valentine got fired from the Mets because of Jeffrey Wilpon. You know, they're just not people who know how to win. Some people know how to win. The Wilpons did not know.
Well, Marcus Stroman, on your favorite place, Peter, okay, Twitter, was doing cartwheels about being happy to stay there. Yes, sir, I'll be more happy to stay there. So
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm going to go ahead and kid around with Peter about Twitter. Okay, my new buddy on Twitter, hopefully and everywhere else, that Marcus Stroman was doing cartwheels. He didn't mind accepting that offer to stay around for another year because now I know he sees the energy that so many people do with the change of ownership. And
That's how you win. That's how you win. You keep your good players.
Well,
As
you
opposed to half the team. I mean, I'm always amazed, you know, with Houston, for instance. You know, Detroit lets Verlander go. I mean, how do you let a guy like Verlander go? You got a guy like that. He's one of the best pitchers in the league, and you let him go. How do you root for a team like that? It's just horrible.
well, but you got Mike Ilitch who's spending the money. His son Chris Ilitch isn't doing it. So obviously, you know, it all comes out when you have ownership changing from the kids to the father who's willing to spend money versus the kids that are not. And you see you're in a rebuild. I see your point, Peter, and you're 100% right. And you've been around this game and probably done 10 million times more than I've ever done. Although, you know, it's not like we don't associate with the same people. I'm sure you're familiar who Tony DeMarco is and Barry Bloom, guys that are very credible that I talk to every now and then.
Yeah, sure.
So it's not like we don't have comment, but you've probably done more about this game than I can do in 10 million lifetimes. You know, so I wouldn't even begin to even question anything you're going to say to begin with.
Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. The beautiful thing about baseball is, like, what do they say? Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one.
It's true.
You know, and that's the beauty. The beauty of baseball is everybody. It's like a religion. Baseball is a religion, and everybody is part of the same tribe, and that's the beauty of it.
I think another thing, which is the beauty of baseball, and I've noticed this over the years, is you can be away from somebody for 5, 10, 15 years, and then you see them again like they haven't forgotten of you.
That's absolutely true. Sure.
One of my great friends, I know you're probably familiar with, is Kevin Rand.
No.
Well, you're not familiar with him? He used to be a trainer in the Yankee system, and he started with me. And then, of course, we maintained friends. He's with the Marlins and, of course, with the Detroit Tigers now as a head trainer, Kevin Rand.
Terrific.
But you're right. Baseball has such a small circle. You haven't seen somebody in 10 years. You walk up to, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and back in 1987, I was the director of public relations for the Gastonia Rangers, and I had Sammy Sosa and Juan Gonzalez on that team.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, we
Yes,
lost
you
9
did.
games. And how did that turn out? They turned out some pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, again, you know, Bobby ended up training Sammy Sosa. Who did he want? He wanted a player from the Chicago White Sox. I can't think of his.
Bell, wasn't it?
No, Bell was a different trade. No, this is a Hall of Famer who was a White Sox for years and years and years. A great hitter.
Well, Harold Baines.
I'm sorry, Harold Baines. Thank you. It was Harold Baines. Yes, and so they thought this would be a good idea. That either of those players, Sosa or the other one, would be okay to trade. They weren't quite ready yet for the major leagues, and they thought that Harold Baines was going to be just the perfect person to put them over the top. But it turned out when Harold Baines ended up in Texas that he was very sad and unhappy. It hurt him that his White Sox had traded him away. He really didn't want to be in Texas. And when you're African American and you're in Texas, not always the greatest thing in the world either. And that's something else I discovered about, you know, what happens if you're playing in Texas. Not the greatest place for tolerance.
Yeah, it's not like George Bush probably hasn't heard that a time or two about trading away Sammy Sosa.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But
Yep.
all he did was go on to be the president of the United States, so go figure. I don't know.
Yep.
You know, they actually had cardboard cutouts of him at the Ranger games this year, him and his wife, Laura,
That's lovely.
next to Nolan Ryan.
Yeah, well, Bobby's had only fine things to say about George Bush. Said he was a terrific owner. Loved baseball. He said that more than anything, what he wanted to be was the commissioner of baseball.
That's right, he did.
More even than president. He wanted to be the baseball commissioner.
Yeah. So you talk.
How do you think he would have been as a commissioner?
He'd have been terrific. He'd have been fine. Yeah.
Here we are completing 2020, And let's talk about some of the rule changes that they had, the 7 inning doubleheaders, and a lot of the different things that they had. You know, we have universal DH, which I think will stick, and then the extra inning rule. We had a man on second base. Were there what of all those rules? Were there any that you liked or disliked that may have staying power?
My attitude was this: the fact that they were playing at all was spectacular. The fact that they could figure out a way in the middle of this pandemic to have a baseball season, I just thought that was greater than sliced bread. I thought it was magnificent. So I didn't care what they did. You know, you want to make 7 inning doubleheaders, go ahead. You want to throw a guy on second base when the 10th inning starts, go ahead. You know, you want to have to make a pitcher pitch to 3 guys. My wife has been complaining for years about, 19 pitchers in one baseball game. And so that, sort of took away, that pitchers one after another. I was okay with all of it. My feeling was the fact that they were playing ball, and I got to watch it on TV. We got into the World Series, as it turned out. The Tampa Bay Rays, that is. I don't know how the hell they did it, but they did. And it was magnificent. And so I have nothing to complain about, nothing.
I know lots of people talked about this being a year where they should have an asterisk, and I've gone on record saying
they wanted an asterisk when Roger Maris hit 61 home runs. Everybody wants an asterisk. Forget the asterisk.
well, I agree.
You don't need asterisks.
Even for the strikes shortened 1981.
You don't need asterisks. Everybody knows what the situations are. You know what it is. You know what happened. Records are records. You make the numbers, you make the numbers. That's why it so annoys the heck out of me when they talk about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens needing asterisks because they may or may not have taken steroids. Nonsense. Their numbers are their numbers, and they deserve every one of them. It's spectacular what those 2 guys did, and they better be in the Hall of Fame in the next couple of years.
Okay, so you answered I was going to ask you a 2-part question. You just answered the first one where you think they should be in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
Do you think they will get into the Hall?
Yes, I do. I do. Because all the fuss budgets are going to die off, and all the young kids who will not particularly understand or care about the controversy about steroids will vote these guys in. You look at a guy who was a Cy Young Award winner 7 times, and you're not going to put him in the Hall of Fame? Come on. Ridiculous.
Now, do you think Pete Rose ever gets a shot?
That's another question.
And the same thing, does he get a
Yeah,
shot?
I know. Well, I did a book with Pete Rose. I love the guy. I think he's fabulous. I guess so. Put him in as a player. Don't put him in as a manager. Put him in as a player. He was the greatest player of his generation.
What would you say the odds are on him getting in? Just, if I wanted to make a bet.
I'd say for Pete Rose, 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I had the same attitude towards Sammy Sosa. Put him in. I work with the guy.
Of course, put him in. Sammy McGuire, you better put McGuire in with him. The 2 of them saved baseball in 1998 after that strike, after that nonsense in 1994. Of course you put him in. Do you think one single owner turned away the money they got from their performances? Not one. And the other thing, of course, the other thing is that every owner, every manager, every general manager knew who was taking steroids. Do you think they cared at the time whether their guys were taking steroids? No. I mean, come on. The whole thing's ridiculous.
I got to tell you a great Sosa story. I remember when the Marlins were playing at Joe Robbie Stadium. I will only call it Joe Robbie Stadium, okay?
Okay, that's fine.
And anyways, he's with the Cubs at the time, and I get credentialed for the game, and I wanted a one-on-one interview. Well, what chance do you think I've got doing it? So I go up to Sharon Pinozzo at the time, who was with the Cubs, and she wouldn't cooperate. So I go up there, I'm on the field, and I started saying, "Hey, Sammy," and then he looked at me with this wide grin from here all the way to Alaska. "How you been, Sammy?" And then he's giving me a wider grin and said, "Listen, Sharon, I went out there, was this guy's director of PR in 1987. Do you believe me now? I'd like to get that interview. When can you set it up? And he looked at her. Next day, I was in the clubhouse, had a chance to talk to Sammy, and we spent time reminiscing about our time in North Carolina. So, I mean, but you're right. But yet there's perception that some guys should get in. Will they get in depending on the attitude? I don't know, but I agree. Anybody
Look
that,
in. Sammy will definitely get in.
anybody that made a solid contribution.
Anybody who can hit 66 home runs in one season deserves to get into the Hall of Fame, believe me.
How about Rafael Palmeiro?
Absolutely, he should get in. Absolutely, he should get in too. He was a magnificent, magnificent baseball player. Sure.
Okay.
And
All
then,
right, boys.
all right, so let me go over a couple things real before we wrap up the broadcast. Okay, Peter, why don't you let everybody know how they can go ahead and get your book? Stuart will say his stuff, and I'll wrap up the broadcast. All right, Peter, let people know how they can purchase your book or books.
You purchase my books on Amazon because I think most of the bookstores are closed these days. You go to Amazon, you'll find them.
All right, Stuart.
When does the Bobby V book come out? Or
I've
when's
got
it-
to sell it. I've got to sell it to a publisher first. Probably in the spring would be my guess.
Okay, great. I look forward to that. So I'm Stuart Hack, Hack Tax and Accounting Services, who wrote his own version of the Bronx Zoo about a taxpayer that tried to take all his animals as dependents. But seriously, I'm in Palm Beach County, Wellington, Florida, hacktaxandaccounting.com. You can reach me 561-214-6171. I am also the immediate past president of the Wellington Chamber of Commerce and, of course, the current treasurer because it's the law. If you're an accountant, you have to be the treasurer of any organization that's out there. And that's all I got.
And as far as I'm concerned, okay, my name is Scott Morganroth, Motor City Madmouth, here on the Sports Exchange. Glad to be joined by Peter Golenbock and Stuart Hack. To follow us on Twitter, you can do so at Tribune South. That's Tribune South. That's how you can follow us. On Facebook and Instagram, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the South Florida Tribune. We have 6 broadcasts on it: the Sports Exchange, No Limits, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, Real and Rare, Fantasy Football, South Florida Tribune Podcast. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. We have media distribution partners that send us content. We have writers. We have the Motor City Monitor. We promote a lot of Metro Detroit sports doings, and we also have the broadcast there. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com and connect with me on LinkedIn, Scott Morganroth. If you want to hear the audio version of this broadcast, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. So meanwhile, Peter, it's been a pleasure having you on the broadcast tonight. It really is. Enjoyed exchanging baseball stories with you, and I can't thank you very much. And I look forward to catching up with you in St. Petersburg down the road, and look forward to staying in touch with you on social media and whatnot. But it's been great talking baseball with you, Peter. So the pleasure is all of ours. It really has been a lot of fun. So
Pleasure was mine.
So on behalf of Stuart Hack and Peter Golenbock, my name is Scott Morganroth, Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Sports Exchange. And I should point out, since this is a Veterans Day broadcast, happy Veterans Day, and we appreciate everything the veterans have done for us. So meanwhile, we have some veterans on this broadcast, and happy Veterans Day, and to all the veterans out there as well. So good night, everybody, and thanks for joining us.